Forget everything you've been told about flat organizations. Forget the idea that AI is coming for everyone's job. The biggest revolution happening in business right now isn't the death of a role, it's the role's rebirth. We're going to break down how middle managers are transforming from paper pushers into the new power brokers of the AI era. Now, this isn't a survival guide, it's a playbook for what could be classified as corporate takeover. So let's get into it. Welcome to Convergence. I'm Lauren Hoque Zafer from Zurich.
Faisal Hoque from Connecticut.
Convergence is a series dedicated to exploring the pivotal intersections of technology, business, and leadership. So let's kickstart. What are we envisioning with the term middle management to start with?
If you go beyond C-suite, middle management starts right there. Depending on the size and the shape of the organization, you may have middle management. And you usually have like some C-suite, chief operating officer like yourself. But then you may have VP, you may have senior VP, director, and then you go all the way to group leader, right? So depending on the size and shape of the organization, you may have 3 layers, you may have 1 layer, you may have no layer. But I think the roles and the responsibilities stays the same, but it gets elongated or it gets shortened.
I think as well, it depends on the size of the organization. So I've witnessed organizations that have multiple middle managers. You've got also organizations that are even a little bit smaller and they still have multiple middle managers or middle management, different levels, depending again on the size and scale. So if we were to envision, and this would probably differ dramatically as you've highlighted with the titles and the associated size of the organization. But when we're talking about middle management, it's not only the envisionment of where they might sit in the organization, it's also about what would you say the connotation is around middle management at the moment?
It really depends on the organizational culture, and it depends on almost the CEO to a certain extent. So if you look at NVIDIA's CEO, he has literally, depending on the day, he claims he has 30 plus, I've never talked to him, but 30, 40 plus direct reports. I couldn't possibly handle 30, 40 direct reports. I'm very much of a believer of doing one thing at a time and having smaller amount of decision, but the right decision versus everybody coming to me, right? So what does that mean? That means that people that are working for you, if let's say I have 5 to 7 direct reports, they have to be able to push down the decision making and the leading, not just decision making, the leading to the next layer of people. So that's basically management. It's leadership and decision making and enabling other people to do their best. So that has not changed regardless of technology. What technology has done and increasingly has been doing, it's not just with AI, it started with automation and other things. Certain decision augmented or enabled by providing you the best set of data, a faster turnaround, right? And with AI, it's gotten to the next level of efficiency in terms of data collection and data dissection and data analysis and able to get the right support to make your decision. So what does that mean? That means that it can free up a great deal of your time to do other things. So the question is, where do you want to focus that time and energy for the betterment of your organization?
100%. But I'm going to park that thought 1 second because I'm going back to what you said about the NVIDIA CEO. I also had that in my head when we were talking at the start. I watched an interview very recently with the Revolut CEO, and he also had expressed that he has like about also 30, 35 direct reports. Now, I questioned, is this a strategical choice in terms of leadership where a CEO decides that middle management per se is not necessarily necessary? So that's one part of the equation. And if that is a choice, a strategic choice, that middle management is not necessary, is that something that evolves with the size of an organization? So is there then the progression that the larger an organization becomes, there could be this organic necessity for middle management? Again, is it a strategic choice? Is it an organic evolution? Now, one thing that contributes to is, and maybe you've seen this as well with the NVIDIA CEO, I don't know if it's 1-for-1 comparison, but the Revolut CEO was also talking about the performance culture that's created without the layer of middle management, in the sense that strategic approach to hire in terms of looking for great talent, not adequate or subpar talent, there's not necessarily this requirement for middle management. What's your thoughts on that?
I've been part of large organizations my entire career, and I've seen anything from GE to MasterCard to my defense contracting partner, CSCI. They're fairly large organizations. They may not be, tracking to be trillion-dollar companies, but they're certainly multi-billion-dollar companies. And I think that it depends on the CEO's own personality and the CEO's capability of juggling many different things and the complexity of the interest, complexity of the growth strategy. But in general, when you get to a certain size and shape, it is very difficult to keep an eye on every minutia detail. And then people coming and boggling, talking to you, unless you're completely hands off and 30 people talks to you maybe once a month. That may be the case too. What I know from being part of these large organizations and working with and having them as customer, you can only tackle so much as a leader, right? And you have to give the autonomy for other people to make the best decision possible. And that's how they shine, right? It doesn't mean that you can't talk to an engineer or you cannot talk to a salesperson or you cannot talk to a program director that's working in a particular program. As a matter of fact, you should do that because that's how you're going to get the ground knowledge, right?
But then do you think that that's a question of hiring strategies and policies and finding the right talent where there's not a necessity for 30 individuals to knock on your door?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So let's say 30 people report to you. They got to talk to you at least once a month, right? How do you know what's going on, right? So if you do it once a month, and then what happens? So you got 30 days covered, right? So it's not beating down your door, but it's also the amount of time you have to spend on decision cycle, unless you're just rubber stamping whatever your talented managers are telling you, and that may be okay.
So maybe let's look at it from a perspective of larger organizations and smaller organizations. I think that the audience or people that are maybe new to the podcast, I work in a scale up. So I am in a very agile environment. I have to make dynamic decisions. And if we're looking at the middle management within my own organization, it is somewhat different to middle management in larger organizations. Now, if we take these two angles, I sometimes feel that middle management gets a little bit of an unfair reputation. Because in some organizations where resources really are a fundamental issue, then they don't even have a chance, as you said, to lead or make decisions because they're so involved in the operational. How does that transpire from your experience in what I've said in larger?
I think this is the heart of organizational culture, right? So the way you align your organization and the way you motivate and inspire your organization is when people have common understanding of the goal and the aspiration, and how does those goals and aspiration ties to your teams, whatever that you're trying to execute, right? So if there isn't a common understanding of that, the problem begins there. But if you do have that common understanding and the senior team, let's say C-suite, do believe in the team and they believe that the team will make the best decision, that's where the middle management can shine. If the middle management adopts a mantra or they're forced to adopt a mantra, I said so, therefore you should, then it kind of fails because you're not really leveraging the talent, the know-how those people are bringing to the table. Because when somebody is a middle management team that's focused on, let's say, a particular area of operation or development or market penetration or whatever the case may be, they know that area the best. So you have to trust that they're bringing the best set of data or decision forward to move the organization ahead because, their success is tied to your overall organizational success.
The technological component. So we introduced AI into the discussion, and the article that we're commenting on here is about the rebirth of middle management. Now, if there is a rebirth, what specific pressures, especially, for example, the rise of AI, are forcing this evolution right now?
Take a very simple example of, let's say I'm a procurement manager, right? And my job is to look at all the things that coming in my pipeline that I have to evaluate and then mobilize my team to procure a product or service for my organization, right? And so the queue comes in and I have to see, okay, well, does this particular request, because somebody requested to purchase this, does it align with the overall corporate strategy? Does it have budget? Does it have approval of the senior management team? Does it fit into the proper budget allocation, et cetera, right? And you would spend enormous amount of time, even when you have automated procurement system, kind of just ticking those boxes and making sure and then mobilize that process. Now imagine if you have an AI agent that has done groundwork, meaning meets valid budgetary requirement, and you can mobilize that process, right? Because you have an AI agent, you can imagine that it just cut down your work of all those validation and checking the box. So what you can do now, you can go and have that extra time to do other things. So the question is, what are those other things? So maybe you teach your next generation how to be a strategic procurement manager that establish a partnership with your vendor, not just a buyer and seller relationship. You can spend more time scanning the market to get more competitive advantage. You can become a coach or a mentor for the next generation people who can rise from procurement agent to a procurement manager. These are, if you look at that example, it's a very mundane, not so exciting or sexy example, but it is a critical function in any organization because the business is about, you got to source your raw material, whatever that is, or source your resources, and then add a value and then sell it, right?
No, it's funny that you mentioned this example because I worked in this exact example 2 weeks ago. If you look at, as you've highlighted, there's a number, it was particularly in supply chain, there's a number of sales and operational execution processes that are normally embodied by a human individual. We're talking about like middle management. So you're talking, as you've mentioned, procurement specialists, then you've got supply planners, you've got demand planners, you've got manufacturing experts, you've got logistic coordinators, you've got inventory planners. All of that per se can be replaced, but not like replaced in that sense from a task, an individual or collective task perspective by a GenAI agent ecosystem. It could be an example of just one agent, or it could be a multi-complex, like agentic ecosystem. Now, the thing that I relished when you were communicating that, Faisal, is that all of the opportunities that are presented with the implementation of AI to create that collaborative agent landscape, which is an example of digital transformation, this allows the more human to be encouraged and supercharged in the organization. So we're moving into an element where humans actually have an opportunity to strengthen human relationships. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. Funny you're talking about your experience. I got involved in early days of internet in GE to launch their first B2B e-commerce platform, which was basically a procurement system. The idea was that you leverage the GE buying power with all the supplier base that GE had, and you will pass that on to your customer. So we didn't have AI back then, but it was basically creating a marketplace with human agents that will match up the need with the suppliers and provide that as a service, right? So, but back then, there was still a very much of even though you could create a centralized catalog, somebody will still have to go through that catalog and siphon through it and etc. And Google wasn't even there yet. It were just, so you couldn't just do search like we do search, right? So now I had that your example of adding a generative AI front end, and then having a bunch of a smart agent that does execute based on that generative AI prompt or whatever you want to call it, it opens up a whole lot of opportunity for efficiency, but also to connect with the different type of people, both inside your organization and outside of your organization.
And we're at that fascinating point as well, because it's the agentic, and I have read so much about the agentic. I mean, I think it's a really interesting concept. We're at that point where, it is about replicating a workflow, automating a workflow with the use of generative AI. And if we look at if AI takes over processes, as we've highlighted, that managers, they have to become shapers of culture. Now, what does it actually mean for a middle manager then to manage a team's culture, shape a team's culture instead of just a workflow?
So, here's an opportunity. If you have a lot of time and you're not spending mundane, repeated tasks like we just described, we'll just take that same procurement manager and an example. So we have the same context. You can imagine that person spending time now establishing or extending a corporate culture whereby the corporate culture may be very collaborative centric, both internally and externally. So the manager could easily become a coach or orchestrator of this collaborative cultural notion where they're establishing relationship with the suppliers and the internal team so that they can maybe create joint opportunity, not just as a buyer-seller relationship, right? But that takes an intentional approach to talking to people and learning from them and communicating the challenges that you may be having, and then get into innovation mentality because you're bringing in diverse perspective. So imagine the impact of that, right? Because now that procurement manager has a chance not just push innovation and collaboration, but set up a cultural norm that can move the organization forward ahead of its competition, right? So it gives a competitive advantage because the role of that particular middle management just changed with a different cultural connotation. But that's a mindset.
Yeah, that is a mindset issue, and it's also the development opportunity that's presented with the ability and capability, the technical enhancement, the support to develop professionally your own skill set. Also, what's quite interesting, I think, is that it's this mentality and shift of an organization doing more with less. So you've got the support, you're supercharged by AI, and there's a lot of C-suite executives that are focusing. We've seen many sort of public narratives in the press about, oh, no one's seen the ROI on AI. But if you look at that, you have the same workforce. So there's no operational cost increase on your working capital. You have the implementation of AI and you're able to do more because things that are driven by individuals and humans that result in sort of ROI calculations, KPIs that are measured by, simple example of customer service enhancement, throughput rate. These are all doing more with less. And this is a mentality that I've seen the market shift in as well, doing more with less.
Or, this very, philosophical and mindset and leadership that you can either adopt a scarcity mindset or you can adopt a abundance mindset, right? So the people and the leader who look at these capabilities as a abundance creation opportunity versus I have the ability to cut costs. So that's a scarcity, right? Because if we reduce, then maybe my top line growth will go up. So that's one type of mentality, but a complete opposite mentality is that, well, now I can do so much more. As a result, I can grow, not cut, right? It all depends on that mentality. I'm a believer of abundance philosophy. All this technology is actually can give you abundance of opportunity that you can leverage. Already there is a lot of example where the new generation startups are a lot smaller, but they can do a lot more because the roles and the responsibility are different, right? It's not that you don't need people, you need people, but the roles are very different than what it used to.
I think this also poses in the direction that a lot of middle managers might feel a little bit scared, in the sense that it's that what you're highlighting, this new rise, the elevation opportunity, the mind shift change. There's also component of, they might be a lot who fear redundancy. And I think that what we're providing here and what you're providing in the article in the playbook is also a step that is an analysis and elevation of people not to fear redundancy. Because as you say, it's not a message of resist it. It's about embrace it, reposition yourself as indispensable when AI cannot compete. It's like things that we highlight and you highlight very often in your thought leadership articles: empathy, vision translation, cultural glue. That is what will bring essentially organizations forward.
100%. And I think that it's bi-directional in the sense the middle management has to take a role, a proactive role where they can show their own opportunity for growth, and the senior leadership, meaning the C-suite, has to redefine the success criteria and hiring criteria and the promotion criteria, et cetera, so that it's bi-directional. So it's a bi-directional responsibility to embrace this new set of opportunity that may be created by technology. And listen, we've seen this kind of shift repeatedly as technology has come and go and evolve, right? I mean, the early internet example that I was giving, the size of procurement department back then versus now are already a lot smaller. But the role of procurement department is very different than it used to be. The successful procurement organization has become an innovation center because they're the eyes and ear of all the supplier base. So where they can bring lots of outside innovation to the organization because they have those relationships and the ear and the ground, right? So that's where the opportunity lies, right? What do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on growth, or do you want to focus on keeping the wheel running, chugging along, and let where it needs to fall?
One thing that I've got in my head as well is that, if we envision this rise and it actually happens, if middle managers take the opportunity to rebirth themselves, which is extremely possible as we've spoken about, do you think that there'll then be a competitive element that will organically grow in an organization between middle management and C-suite? I mean, in my opinion, I think that parameter in the strategic direction, because you've got the movement of middle managers then being more strategically influential in that sense. Do you think C-suite executives should they fear middle management? That's a good question.
Look, a good leader hire people and depend on people who are much smarter than they are and much deeper domain expertise than you yourself will have, right? So for example, I may be a thought leader, but I don't go direct our team on how should we produce this podcast, meaning in terms of how to the package, that's their responsibility. So it's a simple example, but it's a very relevant one, right? Take that in a wide scale. They got to bring the ideas, and you have to be thrilled that they bring the idea, and you have to inspire them to bring that idea. That's how you become successful collectively. So if you are fearing that your middle manager is becoming better than you, then you're not looking at it with the right lens, right? And by the way, there's a responsibility by the senior leaders who needs to create succession planning, right? So if you don't give the autonomy and if you don't groom them to make bigger decision and more critical decision of the organization, how do you create a succession plan? In these days, any successful organization, whether you're talking about NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, or any other organization, the reason they're successful is not just because of their technology, it's their authenticity, right? The organizational authenticity comes from the organizational culture and the leadership mindset that's being set to do things in a particular way that no other organization can replicate, right? So bringing people from outside and put them in leadership role is difficult. That's why you see successful organizations repeatedly try to elevate their next CEO from within the organization, not necessarily from outside the organization. And sometimes it works when you bring from outside, sometimes it fails. Look at Starbucks as an example, right? It was doing great. New CEO went down, and now they have a new CEO. And the new CEO is going back to where the founder of Starbucks culture. So my point is that you should not only embrace the effort and ideas and the things that middle management brings, you should groom them so that they can replace you, right? And they can be better than you.
And a lot of countries have this system. Switzerland has this system. So Switzerland and a lot of larger organizations, you can take an example of OBS, Sergio Ermotti, the CEO, he started as an apprentice. And they have this attitude, they have an apprentice system. So there's an opportunity for individuals to go to university, or they can stay within the apprentice system and start working in an organization at the age of 16, 17. Now, they have quite a public sort of opinion that's circulated around that it's a very profitable option because people can then rise with the culture and experience and understand what is important for the business. So it's exactly as you're saying, you see it an example of successful organizations and countries.
Yeah, we don't have like a government-led kind of a program, but all organizations have deep relationship, or successful organizations have deep relationship with universities and training centers and others. And most organizations have some sort of an internship program that basically brings those people so that they can join the organization and create the next pool of resources and learns the culture through that internship, right? So yeah, it's critically important to have that bi-directional sharing.
So we've certainly had a bi-directional sharing in this episode, and I actually found the topic extremely fascinating. I think that there is an opportunity for middle managers to successfully evolve, especially in the role that we're sort of putting them as human AI orchestrators. And I think, there's an opportunity to really create a more powerful and permanent managerial shift. So thanks, Faisal, for another extremely thought-provoking conversation, and I hope that everyone else has enjoyed it who's joined today.
This was great. I really enjoyed this particular episode because this is very practical, pragmatic, but also forward thinking, right? Because what's happening throughout the industry.
100%. So don't forget to subscribe on the channel of your choice, be it Spotify, YouTube. There's more exciting conversations to come. Thank you.